Hadley Price is currently involved in solar outreach and education programs in both Oregon and Florida. He grew up in Gainesville, Florida, and moved to Oregon 30 years ago, where he founded and operated 2 technology companies, which he owned and managed for over 20 years. Hadley sold both of his companies in 2003, and in 2007 became the Director of Marketing and Technology for Solar Oregon, a nonprofit organization that encourages the use of solar energy to Oregonians. Hadley returned to Gainesville, Florida in 2010, and with the help of many others, launched Clean Energy Logistics Lab, a company which partners with nonprofit organizations, community groups, and solar installers to connect the public with cost-effective solar energy systems. As information officer for Clean Energy Logistics Lab, Hadley helps educate the public about solar through online programs and public workshops. In the past 5 years, Hadley has participated in the development and management of more than 15 grassroots solar bulk purchase and competitive solar discount programs, which have inspired the installation of nearly 4 megawatts of residential solar. Welcome, Hadley.
Well, thank you so much. A pleasure to be here, sir.
Hadley, we've got a great workshop coming up that we're going to talk about in just a few moments. But before we talk about that, can you tell me a little bit more about your background?
Well, yes. I have over 25 years in information technology. In Oregon, I founded 2 technology companies, West Connect Internet Services and 101 Computer Center. We focused on hardware development and software development. I did sell both of those companies in 2003 and focused primarily in communications and then also in cloud database management and development.
So where along the line here did you get involved in the solar industry?
Well, in 2007, there was a program through AmeriCorps called the P2 program, which basically coupled people such as myself who had been successful in business with nonprofits to assist with various projects and to do it for 1 year. And basically, my duty was for that year to help bring this 30-year-old nonprofit company kind of into the new age a little bit in communications. And so I focused primarily on outreach channels and educational channels.
And how did you do with that?
Well, you know, all of it was successful. First of all, I want to say very specifically that it's a great team that we have in Oregon, at Solar Oregon, the board of directors, wonderful people, the executive director, Claire Carlson, also up there that helped build a lot of these programs. We have partners in Oregon. The city of Portland is a partner, Oregon Department of Energy, Energy Trust of Oregon, and then also many solar installation companies throughout the state of Oregon are all partners of Solar Oregon now.
And what kind of programs did you launch with all those partners?
Well, you know, we basically just expanded on some of them and then launched some brand new programs, but we ended up having statewide public workshops for educating people about solar. And then we also developed what's called the Solar Ambassadors Program in Oregon. We also built a co-op for Solar Rex Co-op and Green and Solar Tours. That's a tour of well over 100 locations in Oregon that have installed solar, and that's a tour that takes place once a year. And then our Goal Net Zero workshops, that is a tour that takes place only once a year, but that's very specifically focuses in on residential Goal Net Zero, those people that are trying to create an environment that is very sustainable.
Solar ambassadors, were those folks that had successful solar
yeah, exactly.
in their house?
Right. One of the things that we definitely learned early on was that anybody who went solar was very proud of that, very pleased with doing that. And one of the things that just wasn't out there was the ability to share your story. Right. And we knew that once a person shared their story of going solar and other people heard that story, then they felt more comfortable with going solar.
What was your experience? I mean, when you got into this in a big way, what were the challenges, or what was the need that you felt like, particularly from a public information standpoint?
Most certainly. Actually, when I first got involved in it, I was really intrigued with the fact that there were some positive, real strong positive aspects about solar. One, it definitely transcended bipartisan lines, and also, in fact, transcended cultural lines around the world. I found that most people really liked the idea of solar, but they just didn't understand solar and how it worked. There were a number of what I call undesirable things that were kind of going on at the time. There was a disparity or a very large lack of accurate information about solar and how to go solar. There were a lot of diversity in the utility companies and how they approached their sustainability programs. There was just simply a lot of confusing information out there, some of it truthful, some of it not, frankly, truthful. There was just a lot to go through. Just to give you an idea, a study was conducted by the Energy Trust of Oregon a few years ago, and it discovered that from the time that a person became interested in solar to the time that they actually turned on the switch, if you will. So in other words, going through this educational process and purchasing and everything else took upwards of 2 years.
Is that right?
A very, very long time.
Is that residential and commercial? Or
both of them, yes. It was
a combination.
Yeah. Yes, it took a long time for people to evaluate it, look at it, understand it, and before they actually purchased the product. That's a very long cycle.
Right.
Very long cycle.
Right. Well, and I think I agree with you that people love the idea of solar, love the idea of reducing or getting rid of that utility bill, but it can be a little daunting to the average person.
Yes, absolutely, most certainly. It definitely can be.
So how did you specifically combat those undesirables or those myths that are kind of out there?
Sure. First of all, we began to collaborate considerably more and bring a lot of information into single websites so that a person searching for solar could have just one source of information. Again, we started doing outreach throughout the state for free public workshops about going solar, that sort of thing. We also included the solar installers in our process. For one, we had seen a great deal of difference in quality of workmanship throughout the state as well prior to our programs, and we wanted to see that kind of fine-tune and become more of a standard in workmanship. And so getting the installers involved and getting into what we call solar bulk purchasing programs, it began to generate quite a bit of interest among all the parties, frankly.
That's interesting. Is there a let's say you have a finite number of solar panels you're going to install. Is there a wide range of quality of installations, and does that installation have an effect in the ultimate efficiency of that system?
Well, one of the things to be aware of is that there's actually quite a bit of difference in panel to panel to panel from the type of panel that they're made, what the products are made of, and how much energy it can produce, and what its degradation factor is, and a number of things. So when I refer to quality of installations, instead of someone just simply taking a bunch of panels and slapping them up on the roof and dangling wires and everything else, we wanted to see something that was more of a standard, that was fit some good standard electrical quality.
So how did those efforts go? I mean, what were the results?
Sure, actually it went real well. For one, we actually discovered that we could see the buying cycle of people drop as low as 3 months. So a minute ago I mentioned 24 months. We could actually start measuring people turning on their solar system within just a short period of time. Another interesting thing that began to happen was we had a lot of community activity take place, and government, such as Alachua County, began to show a lot of interest in becoming more involved in the workshops and that sort of thing. And the quality of workmanship did go up, and the pricing of the product began to stabilize and not be all over the board. And in fact, over time, in a short period of time, Oregon went from, say, less than 100 installations, residential installations in a year, to now they're doing well over 1,000 of solar installations annually, every single year.
You talk about pricing. well, let's start in Oregon. We can move to Florida, but is there a standard or a regulation that kind of governs how solar installers or solar sellers operate?
Well, there are some standards. I mean, you have NABCEP certifications, and you have certifications here in Florida as far as having to pass all those certifications to be sure that you understand solar well enough to install it. That's for sure. So you definitely have to have a certification to install. As far as pricing is concerned, it's a free market, and so I've seen everything from $3, $4 a watt on up to $7, $8, $9, and even $10 a watt. And some of this will depend on the type of equipment that's used and that sort of thing. So one really has to be aware of why there is this wide range of pricing out there.
I'm wondering, as somebody who has an interest in this, is there when you first are dealing with the solar contractor, is there an expectation? In other words, I know energy efficiency is important, but is there a guarantee of sorts in terms of how much power that's going to generate, what that might do to your average bill, those types of things?
Right. A really good installation company would take the time to definitely evaluate your situation, definitely looking at your solar resources, definitely beginning to calculate, what size of a system will you need to do what we call offsetting your total bill or 75% of the bill. What is it that we're trying to accomplish here?
Right.
And so that's a number one factor.
So let's move to Florida now.
Sure.
You're in Gainesville, from recently transplanted from Oregon. What brought you here?
Well, I actually have family here of over 60 years. Like I say, I moved to Oregon a little over 30 years ago. My father, for instance, was a detective on the police force here for many, many years. And my mother was very involved in the community as well. Anyway, I returned to Gainesville. I was intrigued with not only getting to know my family better, to be honest with you, but also Gainesville had the first feed-in tariff program.
Right.
And Portland, Oregon, which is where I was, had the second one. So there was kind of an interesting connection there for the last couple of years.
And for those in our audience who may not be familiar with feed-in tariff, can you give us a quick explanation of that?
Yeah, just very quickly in layman's terms, basically it means an agreement between an individual that has a solar array and a utility to sell that power over a certain amount of time, usually about 20 years, and that utility buys all of that electricity every single month from them. You actually get a check for that. And it's a means by which to stimulate getting solar out there for renewable portfolios, basically.
Does that mean you're not using the solar energy in your own house?
Typically not. No, you're actually selling it in those kinds of situations.
So what lowers your bill is that check you get from the utility.
Exactly. So you have to understand what program you are in and how that's going to relate to what your true costs are and things like that. Feed-in tariffs are not for everyone, by the way, and they do have the way that they work is confusing. But you do have other situations like on-grid situations where you're actually net metered, it's called, and that's where you're basically sharing your power over the electric system. And that's probably the most commonly used procedure out there.
Now, we're going to be doing one of your workshops here, and it's going to be live on Channel 12.
Yes, sir.
And I know you have experience in these workshops, both in Gainesville and back in Oregon. Can you go into the details, though, of what exactly is covered in the workshop and what people can expect to take away from that?
Most certainly. One of the subjects is solar electric systems and hot water systems. And for the most part, that's just how does solar physically work, and it's just an overview. It's not in depth, but it gives a good understanding of how those two technologies work.
Well, how does it work?
Well, that
seems like magic.
Yeah. Well, I suppose if I had some great props over here, I could really show you. However,
if you had to explain it in 2 sentences.
Well, okay.
Solar work?
So you have PV systems, photovoltaic, and that's electrical systems, and that's where it's going to take the energy that is produced from the sun, if you will, and it's going to pump it into your home and then also out to the grid. Where you have hot water systems, that's a little bit different. That's where you're actually preheating either water or some sort of fluid that's going to heat your water source. And that has nothing to do with your electricity. You're just simply heating your water in your home.
And I interrupted what you were saying about the workshop. I know the efficiency of the home itself, aside from the solar system, is an important part of what you talk about.
Yes, absolutely. One of the things that we definitely stress is energy efficiency. For one, you wouldn't want to be putting a solar electric system up on your home or in your backyard on a home that is not energy efficient. You would potentially be buying more of an electrical system than you need, if you will.
Right.
And so the idea here is to bring to an awareness to the individual, how to bring efficiency into this entire picture. And if you can have an efficient home, then potentially you can have a smaller array, which brings your costs down and all the factors. So the idea here is everything working together on your efficiency on your home as well.
Do you talk about, and I've had the benefit of, I did a little research on your site. I know sun hours and calculations are important. Do you go into depth on that so that when somebody is dealing with a contractor, that they have a basic understanding of the math?
Yes, we do. We actually do get into what's called solar offsets, explaining how you're going to look at your electric bill and determine how many kilowatt hours of use that you have on an average month, and you're going to look at how much of an offset of that you're going to produce, and what will the cost of that system be, and how does that relate to energy inflation and over time periods of 20 and 25 years and that sort of thing. So basically what I'm pointing out here is that there's a science to this. There's a need to stop, take a serious look at what it is you're doing, clean up your energy efficiency, determine what your true usage is, and determine what size of system you need. Now determine cost based on the different factors of cost, whatever they may be, but then you'll know going into it, what will my true energy cost be over time? And the savings can be quite substantial.
I'm seeing how this could take some of the trepidation people have because they just don't understand the process, particularly when they're dealing with potential contracts or taking bids from contractors. Now, you hear a lot about incentives, both from utility companies and sometimes from local, state, and or the federal government. Is that still happening, and is that part of what you talk about?
Yes, it is. I mean, we do cover all the different, we don't go into depth, but there are different ways of financing solar. That's the best way to look at that. Anything from what's known as renewable energy credits to a feed-in tariff program to a rebate program. Just to let you know that this morning, GRU, Gainesville Regional Utilities, did just this morning take in the applications, for instance, for their rebate program for residential solar. Progress Energy, just today, they took in their registration process for rebates also for the 2013 year of installation. So there's this interesting process that people have to kind of understand through this whole thing in order to take advantage of some of those. Now everybody gets the federal tax credit, which is a 30% tax credit of the entire system. Okay. But we get into all of those, how does that relate to your system and the bottom line calculation. And I think mostly people walk away getting a fairly clear picture of how that works.
Hadley, another thing that I hear frequently when we're talking about solar energy systems is the return on investment, or ROI. Seems like everyone wants to know, okay, if I spend this much money, how long will it take before I've recovered that money? Correct.
And we do show you how to calculate that. And that, for the most part, is a lot of what we did just discuss. And that is that idea of trying to determine, here's all my costs over time, here's everything related to what power am I going to continue to buy from the utility, what power am I going to generate, how do they work together, and then you can actually chart where you have that return on investment point where it's actually paying for itself, you know. And at one time, this could take a long time. I can remember when it used to take 10, 15 years.
Yeah.
And nowadays, I'm seeing some return on investment calculations 2-3 years into the process.
So if I'm at the workshop and I say, Hadley, I've got a 2,000 square foot house, I'm using 1,200 kilowatts a month, do the calculation.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Well, we are able to do that. In fact, I call it a science, you know, like I mentioned a minute ago. And from that standpoint, in fact, if you don't mind me just simply bringing up, we do cover a solar offset example, and for the most part, an average household might use, say, 1,200 kilowatt hours of power a month.
Right.
And that's kind of an average.
You've got some great graphics. We'll put them up on the screen.
Okay, all right.
After we're done with the interview.
All right. But let's use an average of 14.5 cents per kilowatt hour, for instance, and we do that in our example online. And then we can look at just inflation, for instance. And in Florida, the inflation rate for energy is 5.5%. So over time, we know that energy has been rising at 5.5%, and I doubt that's going to change a whole lot. However, we use a very conservative 3% when we're calculating. And so we can take all of these types of variables. That's my point. We can take all of those variables and put them into a formula, and we can look over a period of time, over, say, 10, 15, 20 years. And we do know for a fact, this is proven, that solar systems work very well upwards of 25 and 30 years. We even know their degradation factor. So we know how much they are going to begin to lose the ability to produce power. So you can actually take all of these calculations into consideration, and you can actually know what your energy is going to be and know when your return on investment is. Like, for instance, we can even show that an accumulative savings just on the inflation, okay, just the cost of energy going up. If a person were to offset 75% of their 1,200 kilowatt hour usage a month, that over time, over roughly a 25-year period of time, you would save well over $15,000 just in the inflation costs alone. It has nothing to do with other savings.
And can the average rooftop or backyard system produce that much?
Yes, I mean, it's possible to do. That's where we get into what's called solar resource. What is your resource?
Right.
And so we would look at the top of your roof, and what is the angle of your roof, and is it facing south, east, west, you know, those sorts of things. There's actually a site assessment that's conducted. You can actually determine what the sun hours will be, how long you will actually get sun on that location in a given day, and work from averages. And that science has actually been around for many, many, many years as well. It's not a guesswork, and you can calculate how much sun hours the system will actually produce right there. Right. So determining the amount of power being produced is really determined on the size of the system at that point, as long as it's all getting everything according to the calculation.
You know, I keep hearing about places like Germany and Oregon kind of leading or out ahead of Florida in these things. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. Florida gets more sun than Oregon, doesn't it?
Yeah, considerably. In fact, it's basically right at twice as much sun hours in a given day. Oregon's sun hours, which, again, we have obviously the sun is up much longer than 2 hours a day. But now you can see where the science comes in. It's the true sun hours to the system in Oregon is less than 2 hours a day. In Florida, it's right around 4 hours a day. And so actually a system would sit and produce more power for 2 more hours here potentially than it would that same system in Oregon. That's my point.
And they have mountains and things that block the sun.
Not only mountains, but a lot of rain, I can assure you. So.
You know, something that intrigued me when I was reading about you was that you called solar installation or solar in general as just as much an art
Yes.
as a science. Now, what did you mean by that?
Well, I tell you, I believe it's an art from the standpoint of just workmanship and aesthetics. I really believe that a person would want to have a system on their home that's pleasing, that looks good,
Right.
that's built right, that is solid, that has all the right conduit, all the right type of mounting and everything for that particular situation. So I believe that there is definitely an art to that. You know, you have engineers and everyone who has spent many years to understand that. But then on the other side, there's the science part of that, which I've been explaining there from the standpoint of it's not just a system being put up there, but really knowing going into this, how much should this system be producing? And nowadays, we have the ability to monitor these systems online, for instance. In fact, we can even monitor the systems clear down to the individual panel nowadays. That is if the system has been designed with microinverters.
We're rapidly running out of time, but
Yeah.
can you tell us when the workshop that we'll be doing here at Alachua County will be?
Yes, sir. It is November 17th. It will be from 10 o'clock in the morning till 12 noon, so it's just 2 hours. It will be here at this building here, the Alachua County Administration Building.
Now, we are thrilled that this workshop is actually going to be broadcast live on Channel 12. It will be broadcast live on the internet. We will have Facebook involved. People will be able to ask questions on Facebook and also email their questions. So we're very excited about that. Who else will be presenting? I know you'll be
Oh, yes.
there.
I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about the young men that are helping here. We have Stuart Block, who is a sustainability studies student at the University of Florida. And he's been a part of also the installation of the solar at Beta Theta Pi. I also have Kevin Veach, who is the owner of Green Energy Options, and he covers the energy efficiency aspects of our workshop. And then we have Michael Collins, who is a market analyst and a finance graduate of the University of Florida as well. So 3 very fine young gentlemen to assist with this workshop.
Is there a solar readiness website we can send people to?
There is a solar readiness website, and it is solarreadiness.com.
What a coincidence.
Yes.
Well, this is, it's very exciting stuff, and I know there are so many people interested in the solar option, and it's just great that we have this resource to help navigate that process for them. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, sir. Pleasure being here today.
They're back, and they're out to get you!
Blood was drained out of their bodies.
Fight the bite!
There has to be an answer.
Use repellent with DEET. Avoid peak mosquito hours, dusk and dawn.
You can't go out there. It's almost sunset.
They're probably night creatures.
Wear protective clothing. Drain standing water. For more information, call 352-334-7930.
We used to write letters to each other a lot. A lot of the notes, they were just really dark.
Expressions of anger. When he was mad, he hit things.
Said something to me about killing himself.
You have to take it seriously. The risk is too great.
You have to try and help them get help.
Tell somebody, tell an adult, counselor, parent, whatever.
What are you going to do? Let them destroy themselves? I don't see much of a choice at all.